In the hustle and bustle of a noisy fair, while everyone was looking at the goods, someone fell, and nobody stopped. But between hurried glances and cold hearts, a man accustomed to never feeling saw something that changed everything. Stay until the end. This story will touch you in a way that you will never forget. It all began on a muggy Wednesday morning, the kind of day when even silence seems to sweat. In the sky, clouds too white to promise rain, but heavy enough to make the air almost unbearable. Oshogbo was bustling, and the main market, the beating heart of the city, was beating hard, as it did every day. People crowded together, stalls opened, voices mingled in a single language made of shouts, bargaining, and smells. But that morning, something different was approaching, something that was not part of the landscape. The red dust kicked up by the wheels of luxury cars announced that the city's masters had arrived. 4 black SUVs, shiny as freshly poured tar, rolled down the Yie. Narrow street with an escort of security guards dressed from head to toe in black. In front, vendors' sound trucks begged to be let in, children ran scared, and older people watched with suspicious eyes. This kind of presence was not common here, and when it did appear, it was not for good reasons. Inside the main vehicle, with the air conditioning at 17 degrees and the tinted windows shutting out the outside world, a man watched everything in silence. Tailored suit, discreet gold watch, clenched jaw, impassive expression. A name known throughout Nigeria, Akil Bamigboy, real estate entrepreneur, ruthless investor, and living business legend. Since the accident that left him in a wheelchair for years, he has become even tougher, as if some of the physical pain had spread into his soul. But after many surgeries and expensive treatments, he is back on his feet. The proposal was clear: buy, demolish, rebuild. The fairgrounds would be transformed into a gigantic, modern, technological, profitable shopping center. The city would gain development, the contract said, but the fair would lose its soul. Every banana stand, every artisanal soap stand, every hand-weighed bag of grains would be reduced to dust. And behind each one of them, there was a story that no one thought to hear, except for those who had no choice but to stay there. On the bench next door, the advisor talked non-stop, pointing to data on the tablet about population flow, return on investment, and usable area per square meter. Akil listened without responding. He had already memorized everything. For him, numbers had always been more reliable than people. Spreadsheets didn't lie, emotions did. And that's why he closed deals with surgical precision, without distractions. At least that's what had always worked until that day. As the cars entered the main fairgrounds, eyes began to gather. Some recognized the man from newspaper photos. Others simply noticed the contrast, the polished shoes, of the security guards stepping on the same dirt where the saleswomen walked barefoot. The tension grew in silence. A boy tried to sell popcorn to the driver, who ignored him with a curt gesture. A woman pulled her daughter away, as if she had foreseen a storm. And in a way, she was right. Further on, the team stopped in front of a simple restaurant. This was where the meeting with the mayor and local investors would take place, a deal that would move millions. The lawyer was waiting at the back, table ready to hand over the paperwork. But before the driver could even open Akil's door, something interrupted the protocol. Something unexpected. A dry sound. A soft but clear thud, as if someone had dropped an empty bag on the floor. But it wasn't a bag. The security guards looked first, then the curious. In the middle of the narrow corridor, in the shade of a cassava stall, a young woman was lying on the floor, thin, dirty, her face turned to the side. She had fallen suddenly, as if life had given up on supporting her. Some people moved away, others looked on in disgust. One woman murmured, "There's always one of those," and they kept walking. Inside the car, Akil pressed the window button. Something about the scene disconcerted him. It wasn't the poverty, he was used to that, nor the neglect. He saw that every day on the streets he drove through with his investments. It was the way it fell, the way no one even hesitated, as if a body on the ground meant nothing, as if human. Life had lost value there, on the very land where he was trying to build something better. The aide noticed Akil's fixed gaze. "Sir, do you want her out of the way?" The response took longer than it should have. "No, take her with me." The silence inside the car turned to astonishment. No one dared to argue. The security guards looked at each other, hesitated, but a nod was enough. Two of them ran to the body and carefully lifted the unconscious young woman. When they touched her, they realized how light she was, as if hunger had eaten away everything except the dignity that still remained on her dirty face. One of the vendors shouted, "Hey, she's not a criminal. She's just hungry." But no one answered, no one explained, and no one understood why such a powerful man had stopped for someone like her. As the car started moving again, now with the body passed out in the back seat, the lawyer continued to wait at the restaurant table, and the contract papers fluttered in the hot wind that blew dust into everyone's eyes. In the entire city, no one knew yet. Bhutan Empire had just been postponed because of a woman who didn't even have a known name. And the most surprising thing, it's just that not even Akil himself knew why all of this was affecting him so much. But what he also didn't know, that simple decision, stopping the car, would be the last choice made with the mind. From then on, the heart would start fighting to take the wheel. Here, in African Village Story, each video is more than a story. It is an experience that moves, transforms, and stays with you. Sign up now and turn on notifications so you don't miss any twist of fate, any reunion that warms the soul, any pain that transforms, and no story that can change the way you see life. That day, in the moments before she fainted, a young woman in the middle of the crowd was staggering as if she were trying to walk through water. Her eyes, sunken and opaque, could no longer follow what was happening around her. Her hands, thin and rough, were searching for her stomach in an attempt to silence the pain that came from hunger. Not a recent hunger, but a hunger that had already taken up residence in her body. The shacks followed one another like a noisy, merciless maze. People in a hurry avoided her as if she were invisible, as if her weak, sweaty presence didn't even deserve a glance. The afternoon heat punished her exposed shoulders, and the dust stuck to her skin with cruel insistence. The sun gave her no respite, and neither did the world. Kemi kept going because she had no choice, and at that point in the market, there was no more pride, only resistance. When he saw an orange lying on the ground, he hesitated. He didn't know if it was real, or if it was the result of the dizziness that was confusing everything. He bent down with effort. His body no longer obeyed him. His knees gave out. He didn't have time to defend himself from the fall. His body hit the dry ground with a muffled sound. It wasn't a scream, it wasn't a scene. It was just the end of a force that refused to continue. The first reaction was silence. For a second or two, no one did anything. Then came the comments. There's always one of those, "It must be drugs," just to get attention. And life went on. Stalls continued selling. The music played again, and that young woman with her face pressed against the hot clay became part of the ground, as if she were no longer a person. Inside, the tinted glass didn't stop anything from getting through. It wasn't the heat, nor the noise. It was a presence, a nuisance that could not be explained with spreadsheets or logic. In the predictable rhythm of yet another day of absolute control, something gave way, small, almost imperceptible, but enough to tear the veil of indifference. A break in the rhythm, a held breath, a strange sensation, as if time itself, which had always flowed in favor of the powerful, had stopped to look at the ground. The sea. Voice next door was still talking about clauses, signatures, urgency, but it was no longer reaching. It sounded distant, like the noise of an out-of-tune radio. There was an image taking over everything, a disruption in the system. It wasn't the face on the floor, nor the state of the body. It was abandonment, the silent brutality of watching the world spin while someone rotted inside. At that moment, between the thought and the gesture, something crossed. It wasn't charity, nor pity. It was memory, or a shadow of it. Maybe what no one saw in that fallen young woman was exactly what hurt so much, something that reminded her of what had once been the ground. And even though she couldn't explain it, she could no longer pretend she wasn't seeing it. Take her with me. There was no emphasis in the voice, but there was an absence of doubt, a command unarmed by logic, almost intimate, and that's what made everyone freeze. The protocol wavered. The structure trembled. For the first time, the man who never gave in, not because of weakness, but because of something even more dangerous, feeling. The fair didn't understand. How could it understand? People who are used to being ignored don't recognize it when someone sees them. And no one there imagined that that moment, dry, brief, not at all cinematic, had the power to rewrite not just one day, but 2 entire lives. The car then slowly turned onto the dirt road, taking with it not just a body, but the first crack in the page, world where nothing was more valuable than control itself. Do you believe that a simple gesture can change 2 lives at once? Reply here in the comments, yes or no. Let's see how many still believe in the power of stopping and seeing. Nobody knew that girl who was lying in the middle of the street. No name, no origin, no reason for the fall. For many, she was just another one of those who disappear in the rush, the dust and the eyes that learned not to see. But while the body remained motionless, something about that scene bothered him. It wasn't the state he was in, it was the silence around him, the ease with which his pain was ignored, as if he no longer belonged anywhere. The hospital was her first roof over her head in a long time. The clean sheets, the smell of antiseptic, the sounds of the monitor. Everything seemed like a world too far removed from the reality she carried in her body. No one knew what to do with that strange presence. She didn't know what to do with that sudden care either. The name came hesitantly in a whisper, "We have." That was all. And that was enough for Akil to order them to find out who she was, where she came from, how she got there. The first information came from a hospital social worker who had seen her before in another emergency room months ago. She said she was hard to track down, but little by little, the story emerged, and with it a pain that didn't demand attention, just respect. Kemi was raised in an orphanage in the countryside, in a village forgotten even by its own neighbors. The daughter of a single mother, abandoned shortly after giving birth, she grew up among iron beds and donated clothes, without a lap or family name. The orphanage lived off of uncertain donations and heavy rules. The children were divided by age, but they were all treated as a burden. Discipline came before affection, and silence was required before listening. Even as a child, she realized that her existence was only tolerated when it yielded something. At 9, she was already washing other children's sheets. At 11, she was cooking rice for 30 people. At 12, she was taken to her first home, not as an adopted daughter, but as a helper, an elderly couple who promised to take care of her in exchange for work. As soon as she arrived, she was already cleaning, cooking, waking up before the sun, working for food. A child treated like a woman. She stayed in that house for 2 years, and then in another, and another. In each one a different promise, in all the same truth. She was only useful as long as she was productive. When she caught a cold and couldn't get up for 2 days, she was sent away with a bag of clothes and a loaf of stale bread. No one looked for her. No one asked where she would sleep that night. He arrived in the big city with a bundle in his arms and a small hope hidden in his ribs. He thought there would be space there, that he could find a place of his own. But there wasn't. The city has no room for someone who arrives with no name, no contact information, and no money in his pocket. He tried to work at fairs, washing utensils, unloading fruit, cleaning the floors of markets. But the exchange was unfair. Cold food, dirty corners, dangerous looks. And when she got sick, she was always dismissed. One of those times when she was coughing so much that she could barely stand up, she slept behind a stall selling dried fish. When the owner saw her in the morning, he threw water on her and cursed her in front of the customers. And no one said anything. From then on, she started to walk around like she didn't belong. She slept in empty markets, hiding among boxes. She lived off the leftovers that fell. She avoided talking. She didn't ask for more, she just kept going. Markets were his only refuge. There, at least, no one asked questions. They also offered no answers. He went unnoticed, like wind between bags. When he was lucky, someone would give him a crushed fruit, a piece of day-old bread. When he wasn't, he just kept going, without complaining, without drama. He learned not to faint, until that day. When Akil got the gist of the story, she was silent. She listened to it all, and for the first time she realized that she was facing something that not all her fortune could change or fix. This was not a social case. She was not a statistic. She was a survivor, a woman made of wounds and resistance, someone who had learned to exist without being seen. And that affected him more than he expected, not because he felt sorry, but because he understood that her world, the one that came before the fall, was an entire universe that he never had the courage to visit. And now that I had crossed paths with this reality, I could no longer pretend it didn't exist. Have you ever felt invisible at any point in your life? If so, tell us in the comments. "I've been there" could be the start of a conversation the world needs to hear. The white light on the ceiling seemed more like a warning than a comfort. Everything was too clean, too quiet, too static. The pillow was soft, the mattress gave beneath the body, but none of it made sense. The hospital smell, the beeping of the monitors, the muffled sound of footsteps in the hallway, None of these elements matched the routine of hard floors and cold nights in forgotten fairs. Something was wrong, very wrong. The first impulse was to protect himself. His arms moved slowly, as if they expected to be tied. When he realized he could stand up, panic came disguised as lucidity. His mind screamed possibilities: kidnapping, trafficking, sale, punishment. Why would someone who lives off scraps wake up surrounded by white sheets? The question burned more than the fever, because where there is sudden luxury, there is demand later. They looked to the side and saw him there. He wasn't a doctor. He wasn't a relative either. His dark suit clashed with the light-colored wall, and his expression was like stone, cold, firm, unbreakable. He recognized the face at a glance, maybe from an old newspaper, from a headline about lands taken, families expelled, markets demolished. It was him, the man behind the destruction disguised as progress. Anger came before gratitude, and the body, still weak, reacted as best it could. The voice rose in the stuffy room. "What do you want from me? Why did you bring me here? What are you waiting for? For me to kneel?" The words came out brokenly, but his gaze did not tremble. A mixture of fear and contempt, typical of someone who has already lost everything, and therefore no longer fears losing. The attempt to escape was instinctive. His feet had barely touched the ground when they were already staggering. The threads of the needle in his vein pulled at his skin. 2 nurses appeared at the door, but before any restraint could be done, the man raised his hand and said, "He leaves." The gesture was not one of authority, but of weariness, as if he had already expected to be rejected. And yet he stayed. The silence lasted for long seconds, until a sentence pierced the air, sharp and calm. "You were down. I just got up." No explanations, no justifications, no beating around the bush. A phrase that, if said by someone else, might have sounded heroic, but said by someone known for tearing people down and building walls on top of them, it sounded like a disguised threat. Kemi laughed, a short, dry laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "You lift someone up? How many shacks have you destroyed? How many families have become homeless because of you? Do you want to clear your conscience with me?" The prosecutor did not expect an answer. It was more of a shield than a question, and inside that shield there were scars that not even the hospital knew how to heal. The medical team watched from a distance, unsure of what to do. The patients screamed. The man didn't respond. One of them asked if they should remove the visitor. "No, she's fine, she's just waking up." The speech was meant for others, but it felt more like a reminder to himself, because what stood before him was not a rebellious woman. It was a whole life waking up at once. The tension between the two was almost visible. The room seemed too small to contain 2 such different stories. On one side, someone who had learned to distrust everything. On the other, someone who had always taken all certainties for granted. And in that space between the two, a dense silence made of pasts that would never cross. Until now. The door remained open. The man remained seated. He said nothing more. He did not try to touch, explain, or convince. He simply observed, and perhaps for the first time, without trying to understand, because there were things that not all the money in the world could translate. Kemi lay down again, not because she trusted him, but because her body still couldn't handle the revolt. She closed her eyes, but didn't sleep. She listened to the sound of the other man's breathing in the corner. The air conditioning blew slowly. The tension was still there, alive, throbbing, and even without knowing, the two had already begun to move, in directions neither of them had imagined they would go. After everything she's been through, it's not easy to trust an outstretched hand. In solidarity with Kemi, write in the comments, "We understand," because sometimes only those who have fallen know the weight of getting up with distrust. When the room finally fell silent, and her rhythmic breathing indicated that sleep had overtaken her, the atmosphere seemed to change. The air, previously filled with tension, softened. There was still pain there. There was still a wound. But in that moment, her body was resting, and that was a start. The man in the corner didn't move for long minutes. There was no cell phone in his hand, no report open, just eyes fixed on someone who, hours ago, was just a figure on the road to his business. Staying there made no sense on paper, but something kept him rooted to the cold floor, as if observing that sleep was more important than any signature. When he finally stood up, he did not do so in a hurry. The chair turned slowly. His gaze remained for another 2 seconds on the face with its light features and tired expression, and even without witnesses, he murmured softly, perhaps more to himself than to anyone else, I will take care of her. The exit from the hospital was discreet. Outside, the car was waiting for him with the engine running. The driver opened the door without asking anything. In the back seat, the advisor was going over the details of the pending contract. The meeting had been postponed, but not cancelled. The mayor was still waiting. The investors were there. And as always, everything revolved around his timing. Within 3 hours, the empire was back on its feet. Documents were signed. Formal smiles were given. The press recorded handshakes. Everything was as planned. Everything was perfectly under control, at least from the outside. But not even the completion of $1 million deal could erase the image that insisted on coming back. The fragile body, the suspicious expression, the cry of someone who was not used to care, that wouldn't leave his mind. And no matter how hard he tried to concentrate on the figures, he felt something pulling him back to the hospital. When he returned, the sun was already beginning to set. The nurse at the reception desk smiled softly. She already recognized him. The doctor took him to the report room. He showed him the tests. He explained that his condition was stable, only malnutrition, mild anemia, exhaustion. He talked about the importance of a balanced diet, rest times and vitamin replacement. A simple prescription, but with one crucial detail: she needed a safe place. The word hung in the air. Safe. It wasn't luxury, nor comfort. It was security. A rare thing for someone who grew up, surrounded by closed doors and broken promises. The decision had already been made before the question even arose. The doctor had barely finished explaining the discharge forecast when he heard, "She's going with me." I didn't say, "I'll shelter her," or "I'll do my part." I said, "Go with me," as someone who assumes, as someone who carries, as someone who, even without knowing where this will lead, chooses to stay. On the way back to her room, she didn't plan any speeches or announcements. She knew it would be difficult, suspicious, skittish, but deep down she also knew it wasn't just about giving back. It was something deeper, a commitment that did not fit into the contracts he was used to signing, a care that he himself didn't know how to give, but that even so chose to offer. Have you ever felt like you needed to take care of someone, even without knowing why? In solidarity with those who carry invisible wounds, comment here. There are pains that we cannot ignore. Perhaps your empathy will help heal those who still distrust care. The day the luxury car left the fair with the unconscious young woman in the back seat, almost no one reacted. Curious glances, murmurs, speculations, and that was it. The same hands that had seen Kemi fall, that had ignored her for hours on end, now commented in hushed tones, as if they were witnesses to something important. But none of those voices were raised when she needed them most. No water was offered. No questions were asked. It was only after the car disappeared, when the whispers took shape and the lack of explanations became fuel for the evil, that some decided to care. A woman shouted to anyone who would listen, "That girl wasn't fainted at all. She was protesting." A young man who was selling cell phone recharges approached a police officer and pointed to the place where she had fallen. "I heard her swearing at the owner of the construction site. He must have taken her to a distant place to kill her." The conversation grew like wildfire. All it took was an anonymous phone call for a local radio station to report, "Millionaire takes unconscious young woman who was protesting against the demolition of the fair." The story was published on the website at the end of the day, and the next morning reporters were already at the hospital door. Equipped with cameras, questions prepared, and microphones on, they wanted more than information. They wanted a scandal. Speculation took shape. They said she was an activist, that she had been kidnapped, that there had been an attempt to silence her. Blogs opposing the shopping mall project used the case as a political weapon. Akil Bamigboye, hero to investors, villain to the people. Other more sensationalist sites went further. Who is the young woman who made the millionaire change course? But no one wanted to know what Kemi felt, only what got clicks. The hospital tightened security. Firm orders were given. No one was to enter without authorization. Even so, journalists tried to bribe nurses, hide microphones in flowers, and extract information from patients in the hallway. Her name, which had previously mattered to no one, was now headline news everywhere. But not because of the story, but because of the trail of rumors. Inside the room, Kemi barely understood what was happening. She didn't know anything about social media or local politics. All she wanted to do was understand why that man was still showing up here, and why the whole world suddenly wanted to know who she was. In the hospital conference room, as he listened to the doctors explain the necessary care, Akil remained silent. He had learned over time that sometimes silence preserves more than any answer. He denied nothing. He confirmed nothing. He did not feed the headlines. But he knew that the name he had so protected over the years was now vulnerable. And so, he made the decision. There was no way to keep her there any longer. In that environment, she was no longer a patient. She was bait. She was a target. And although she didn't understand it yet, she was being protected not out of pity, but by choice. On the way to the gate, there was no announcement, no press, no explanation. Just a discreetly parked car, a scarf covering Kemi's face, and a quick entry into the back seat. She asked, her voice trembling, "Where are you taking me now?" The answer came simple, without weight, as if he didn't want to explain anymore. Home. It wasn't an invitation. It was a decision, and as sudden as it seemed, it had been clear within him since the day of the fall. If the whole world chose to turn a gesture into a scandal, he would choose to turn a scandal into a new beginning. Have you ever been misunderstood even when you just wanted to help or be helped? Out of respect for so many distorted stories, comment here. I know what it's like to not be heard, and share your experience with us. Maybe your truth will help someone not to give up on their own. The front door opened with a soft, almost rehearsed sound, as if the space was unaccustomed to surprises. Everything in Akil's mansion was orderly, quiet, functional. The floors gleamed free of dust, the walls looked freshly painted, and the air smelled of polished wood and old money. A place made to impress and intimidate. Kemi entered without saying anything. She looked around as if she were entering enemy territory. That house was too big, too cold, empty of people and full of invisible rules. Every detail seemed loaded with a code she didn't know. Her eyes instinctively searched for exits. No sense of shelter, just the weight of not belonging. The housekeeper, a woman with a hard expression and a haughty posture, followed the first steps with veiled distrust. The staff exchanged glances. There was no welcome, no smiles. Just a tidy room and a tray with fruit that was too cut for someone accustomed to peels and seeds. The luxury of the place was not welcoming. Strangely, it hurt. During the first few days, Kemi barely left her room. She felt watched even when no one was around. The bed was too big, and the sheets smelled of a flower she had never seen. She avoided touching the pillows, as if she could ruin everything with a simple touch. When she slept, she dreamed of fairs. When she woke up, she felt the weight of the prison disguised as protection. In the kitchen, he refused very elaborate dishes. He preferred to eat standing up, in the corner, as if he were waiting for someone to arrive so he could order him to leave. Akil watched from afar. He saw her restrained steps, her ever-watchful eyes, her held breath. He thought he was offering security, but he didn't realize he was awakening forgotten traumas. The roof wasn't enough. The walls, no matter how expensive they were, didn't mean shelter for someone who had spent her life being discarded. The absence of bars did not eliminate the feeling of imprisonment. Kemi lived as an unwanted guest of a kindness she had not asked for. She avoided looking at her host. She responded as little as possible. She slept with the door locked, even in one of the safest neighborhoods in the city. She was at war, not with the house, nor with the man who had put her there, but with everything that his gesture represented: control, power, debt. One late afternoon, when she was informed that new clothes were being provided, she exploded. "I don't need anything else." The anger wasn't about the clothes. It was about the feeling that freedom had been exchanged for comfortable silence, and that once again, someone was making decisions for her, albeit with good intentions. What Akil saw as care, she felt as replacing one cage with another. Because those who have spent their lives being silenced find it strange when they are given a voice, and those who never had a choice learn to distrust even kindness. When pain comes from far away, even care can be frightening. Write in the comments. It takes time to trust. Only those who have experienced deep wounds know how difficult it is to accept a hand that only wants to help. Disturbed, confused, and suffocated by a reality she did not understand, Kemi exploded. The spacious room, the open windows, the soft sheets, none of this meant freedom. To her, it was all just captivity in disguise. With her eyes burning, her voice trembling between pain and anger, she screamed, "You saved me from the fair, but now you keep me locked up here as if I were a trophy of your conscience." Those words went through Akil like a hot iron. He, used to being in control of everything, was not prepared to see his gesture of care turned into an accusation. His wounded pride did not allow him to remain silent. "I don't know how to deal with someone who doesn't want anything from me." The silence that followed was different, dense. For the first time, Akil admitted something that even he didn't fully understand. He didn't know how to deal with vulnerability. He had always lived between contracts and strategies where everything had a price and a forecast. But Kemi was the opposite of that. Overcome by the need to escape, even without a destination, Kemi waited for night to fall. She grabbed one of the coats she had been given, went down the side stairs and crossed the garden. But as soon as she crossed the back gate, 2 security guards intercepted her. "He asked us not to let her go out alone." When she was taken back, she found Akil sitting in the room, silent, just watching her. When she entered, he did not shout. He spoke firmly. "If you prefer the streets, then go." The sentence hit her like a slap, but before she could react, his tone changed. The stiffness gave way to what sounded like a plea. "You're not a prisoner here. I just wanted to take care of you." Kemi's defenses gave way, if only for a moment. She approached slowly. Her eyes now held less fury, more weariness, and a hint of something new, listening. "I appreciate you saving me from the streets, but I need to have the right to come and go and not stay if I don't want to." Akil took a deep breath. What came next was not a rehearsed speech. It was a rant. "I lived my life hardening everything I felt. I hid behind my own walls. When you cursed me, accused me, and I should have left. But I didn't. I thought it was pity, that's all. But I saw you sleeping. I discovered fragments of your story, and I realized I needed to protect you because somehow that saved me too." The silence between the two was different now, less of a barrier, more of a bridge. Kemi extended her hand, and with a slight smile on her lips, she said, "Shall we start again?" She touched his face gently, a simple gesture that disarmed him. "I'm Kemi." He held her hand more lightly than expected from a man like him. "And I'm Akil. Nice to meet you." They both laughed, a little, but enough to break the invisible chains that still bound them to the past. Something was beginning there. It wasn't passion yet, it was recognition, it was healing. Sometimes love doesn't arrive screaming. It blooms in the silence between 2 pains that recognize each other. If you believe that even wounded souls can blossom together, leave a heart in the comments. Perhaps it is there that a new beginning also sprouts. The sky that morning was the same color as the first day Kemi and Akil crossed paths, but everything around her was already another world. After so much tension and silence, she decided to stay. Not because she had nowhere to go, but because for the first time she felt that someone saw her beyond her hunger, pain, and resistance. He didn't smile or celebrate her decision out loud. She simply asked the housekeeper to take her to choose new clothes, comfortable shoes, and everything she had never had access to. With a strange look in her eyes and her feet timid in front of the shop windows, Kemi walked among the fabrics and perfumes with the same caution as someone stepping on dreams. The housekeeper, a discreet and affectionate woman, treated her with unusual respect for someone accustomed to serving. Kemi didn't ask for anything. She just nodded when asked. She returned to the mansion with bags that seemed to contain more than clothes. They contained the recognition that life had denied her for so long. However, that new glow was short-lived. As she entered the house, Kemi heard voices on the phone coming from the office. The half-open door did not hide the authoritarian tone. Akil was talking to the contractors. There were protesters at the fair. His order was clear: call the police and disperse the protests by force. Disappointment sank into her chest as if her old life were pulling her back by the ankles. Her hands slowly let go of the bag. She stood there, between what she thought she was living and what she had just discovered. The sound of her breathing made him turn. He met her disappointed gaze before he even realized he was being overheard. He asked the contractors to wait for further instructions. He silenced the phone. He walked toward her with uncertain steps. He touched her waist, as if holding back a leaf about to fly away. He tried to justify himself. The space he had purchased would be the heart of a gigantic enterprise. Millions were involved, margins, profits, projections. But Kemi didn't want to hear numbers. She interrupted, with the same firmness she had used when she confronted him in the hospital. "Then why don't you do something that won't destroy those people's lives?" The question hung in the air, like a breeze that enters through cracks that were not known to be open. That night, Akil did not sleep. For the first time in years, The power outlet seemed small compared to the impact of a voice. He decided to go to the fair in person, not as a businessman, but as a man trying to understand the value of each face that fought there. The next morning, Kemi at his side, the car, stopped in front of the same market where it all began. The crowd, tense, watched the man who had once symbolized destruction. Akil stood on a wooden box and asked to speak. His tone was different. Less armored, more human. He said yes, he would build the mall, but not like before. It would be a popular center. The former market vendors would have priority. The rents would be symbolic. There would be room for everyone, from the spice seller to the artisan who had never had a store. The applause began timidly, then gained strength like rain on a tin roof. People cried, people hugged each other, and in the middle of the improvised square, Akil took Kemi by the hand, looked into her eyes as if thanking her without words, and kissed her. A kiss that seemed like the signing of a contract between two worlds. Months later, the Oshogbo People's Mall opened. It smelled of fresh food, the sound of laughter, the shops were colorful, and the streets looked like party streets. It was the most visited mall in the country. Tourists came to see the place where a millionaire gave in, and the people won. Akil and Kemi were married in a simple ceremony, in the same place where it all began, and later they implemented similar projects in other cities. It was no longer about profit. It was about dignity. It was about giving people back their right to live. And at the center of it all were the two of them, a man who discovered the value of compromise and a woman who taught the world that. Sometimes all it takes is being heard to change everything. Some falls do not mean weakness, but the beginning of an unexpected new beginning. Kemi didn't want to be saved. She wanted to be seen. And Akil, who never believed in the power of surrender, learned that to love is to give up control. Shopping was born from pain. Love was born from the impossible. And when two wounded hearts meet, even wounds turn into flowers. New paths are being written. Click on the next video and keep feeling. Because here every story has a soul. See you soon.